The air felt wrong that night, like the house itself was holding its breath. I stood in the kitchen, my hands still damp from washing dishes, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. Something was off, but I couldn't pin it down. Was it the way Vanessa's voice had sharpened when she spoke to me earlier? Or the way her eyes slid past mine, like I was just a shadow in my own home? Welcome to the Betrayal Revenge channel, where stories come alive through voices you've never heard told this way before. Stay with us, and let's uncover the truths hidden in plain sight. It all began 3 months ago, on a crisp autumn evening I'll never forget. The leaves outside were turning, painting the suburban streets of Northern California in shades of amber and rust. Our house, my house, stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its white shutters glowing under the fading sunlight. For 30 years, this place had been my sanctuary. I'd raised Vanessa here, bandaged her scraped knees, hung her crayon drawings on the fridge. Even after Douglas left, I stayed, telling myself it was for her, to keep things stable, to keep us stable. That night, I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of chili, the smell of cumin and tomatoes filling the air. The radio hummed softly, some old jazz tune I barely noticed. Vanessa was home from her new job at a real estate firm, her heels clicking on the hardwood as she paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear. I caught fragments of her conversation, something about a deal, a client, a house. Her voice was bright, confident, the way it always was when she talked business. I smiled to myself, proud of how far she'd come. My girl all grown up. "Dinner's almost ready," I called, wiping my hands on a dish towel. No answer. I stepped into the living room, where she was still on the phone, her back to me. She laughed, a sharp, easy sound, and said, "Oh, Candace gets it. She totally understands how these deals work." My smile faltered. Candace, Douglas's new wife, the woman who'd slipped into our lives like a draft through a cracked window. I cleared my throat. "Vanessa, honey, you want to eat now or later?" She waved a hand without turning, a dismissive little gesture that stung more than it should have. "Later, Mom. I'm busy." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and went back to the kitchen. The chili simmered, the steam curling upward, and I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. Later, we sat at the dining table, the one I'd refinished myself after the divorce. The wood was smooth under my fingers, a quiet reminder of the life I'd rebuilt. Vanessa picked at her food, her phone buzzing every few minutes. I tried to start a conversation. "How's work? You sounded excited on the phone." She shrugged, not looking up. "It's fine, busy. Candace was telling me about this new listing she's handling. She thinks we should sell this place." Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me. Sell this place? My home? The house where she'd taken her first steps? Where I'd stayed up nights worrying over her fevers? I set my spoon down, careful to keep my voice steady. "Sell the house? Why would we do that?" Vanessa sighed, like I'd asked something obvious. "Mom, it's too big for just you, and it's old. Candace says the market's hot right now. We could get a good price, split it, and you could move somewhere. Smaller, more practical." Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, like she was testing the waters. I swallowed, my throat dry. "This is our home, Vanessa. I've lived here 30 years. You grew up here." She rolled her eyes, just a flicker, but it cut deep. "Yeah, I know, but Candace says it's not about sentiment. It's about being smart. She's done this kind of thing before. She knows what she's talking about." There it was again. Candace. Always Candace. The woman who'd never spent a single night under this roof, who'd never scrubbed crayon off these walls, was somehow the expert on my life. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around my glass. "Candace doesn't live here, honey. I do. And I'm not ready to sell." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she'd argue, but she just shrugged again, her attention already back on her phone. "Whatever, Mom. Just think about it, okay? Candace says it's a no-brainer." The rest of the meal passed in silence, the jazz on the radio now feeling like a mockery of the warmth I'd tried to create. I watched Vanessa, her face lit by the glow of her screen, and felt a distance between us I hadn't noticed before. When had it started? When had my daughter, the girl who used to curl up in my lap and tell me everything, begun to speak to me like I was irrelevant? After she left for her apartment, I stood in the quiet house, the ticking of the clock loud in my ears. The living room smelled faintly of her perfume, sharp and expensive, nothing like the soft lavender she used to love. I walked to the mantel, where a photo of us sat, Vanessa at 10, her arms around my neck, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. I touched the frame, my chest aching. Had I missed something? Was this just her growing up? Or was there something else, someone else, pulling her away? I told myself I was overthinking it. Vanessa was busy, stressed. She didn't mean to sound so cold. But as I locked the front door and turned off the lights, her words echoed in my mind. Candace says. Candace says. I climbed the stairs, the house creaking under my steps, and paused at the top. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. I laughed awkwardly to myself and said, "Sure, I'll think about it." But deep inside, a smoldering feeling began to take root, a quiet, burning sense that I was being pushed out of my own life. Oh. Had I always been this invisible? I stood in the hallway, my fingers tracing the edge of a framed photo from Vanessa's high school graduation. Her smile was wide, her arms slung around my shoulders. But now, that memory felt like a relic from someone else's life. The house was too quiet tonight, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, something I'd built with my own hands. It was a week after Vanessa's suggestion to sell the house, and her words still hung in the air like damp fog. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself she was just caught up in her new job, her new life. But the more I thought about it, the more I noticed the patterns, small, sharp moments that cut deeper each time. The first came on a Saturday morning. I was in the garden, kneeling in the soft earth, pruning the roses I'd planted when Vanessa was a baby. Their thorns pricked my fingers, but I didn't mind. The scent of blooms was worth it. The sun was warm, filtering through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the grass. I heard the front door open and looked up to see Douglas's car in the driveway. My stomach tightened. He didn't come by often, not since the divorce, but when he did, it was always for Vanessa. I wiped the dirt from my hands and stood, brushing off my jeans. Vanessa bounded out of the house, her laughter bright as she hugged her father. Then I saw Candace step out of the passenger seat, her blonde hair catching the light, her smile polished and practiced. She wore a cream-colored blouse, the kind that looked effortless but cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I forced a smile and waved, but neither of them noticed me. Vanessa was already pulling them inside, chattering about some new restaurant they'd tried. I followed them in, the smell of coffee lingering from breakfast. The living room was warm, sunlight spilling through the windows, but the air felt heavy. Douglas sprawled on the couch, his arm draped over the back, while Candace perched on the armrest, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Vanessa sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through her phone, showing them photos. I hovered in the doorway, unsure of my place in my own home. "Want some coffee?" I offered, my voice softer than I meant it to be. Douglas glanced up, his eyes skimming past me. "Nah, we're good, Evelyn. Thanks." Candace gave a small nod, her lips curving in a way that felt more like a dismissal than a smile. Vanessa didn't even look up. I busied myself in the kitchen, the clink of dishes grounding me, but their voices carried sharp and clear. Vanessa was talking about her job again, her tone animated. "Candace, you were so right about that client. I used your advice and they signed the deal yesterday." Candace's laugh was light like wind chimes. "Told you, sweetheart. It's all about reading the room." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles whitening. Sweetheart. The word stung, a nickname Vanessa used to reserve for me. The second moment came a few days later at Vanessa's 28th birthday party. I'd spent all morning decorating the backyard, stringing fairy lights through the pergola, setting out platters of her favorite foods, deviled eggs, grilled shrimp skewers, and a chocolate cake I'd baked from scratch. The air smelled of charcoal and sugar, and the evening was cool, the sky streaked with pink. I'd invited a few of her friends, but Vanessa had insisted on inviting Douglas and Candace too. The party was lively, music humming from a Bluetooth speaker, laughter rising and falling. I moved between the guests, refilling drinks, smiling, playing the host. But as the night wore on, I noticed Vanessa orbiting Candace. They stood by the dessert table, heads bent together, whispering and giggling like schoolgirls. Douglas joined them, his hand on Candace's waist, and Vanessa beamed at them both. I watched from across the yard, a glass of lemonade sweating in my hand. When it was time to cut the cake, I stepped forward, expecting to hand Vanessa the knife as I always had, but she turned to Candace instead, her voice bright. "Candace, you do it. You're practically family now." The words hit like a slap, though no one else seemed to notice. Candace hesitated, then took the knife with a gracious smile, her eyes flicking to mine for a split second. Was that pity or triumph? I stepped back, my face burning, and busied myself stacking plates. The chatter around me blurred, the fairy lights smudging into halos. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment. But my chest ached, a dull, persistent pain. I'd baked that cake, hung those lights, made this night for her, and yet I was the one standing on the edges, watching someone else take my place. The final blow came late one evening as I was folding laundry in the living room. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of fabric and the distant hum of crickets outside. Vanessa had stopped by to drop off some paperwork, though she hadn't said what it was for. She was in the kitchen, on the phone again, her voice low but sharp. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the walls in this old house carried sound too well. "Candace is right," Vanessa said, her tone firm. "She deserves this house more than Mom does. She's the one who's been helping me, not Mom with her old memories." I froze, a half-folded towel slipping from my hands. The words sank into me, cold and heavy, like water seeping into cracked earth. Deserves this house. My house, the one I'd paid for, fought for, kept standing through every storm. I wanted to march into the kitchen, to demand an explanation, but my feet wouldn't move. My heart pounded, each beat a question. When had I become the outsider? When had my daughter decided I was less than Candace, less than anyone? I stood there, staring at the towel on the floor, its frayed edges blurring as my eyes stung. Vanessa hung up and walked into the living room, her purse slung over her shoulder. "I'm heading out, Mom," she said, her voice casual, like nothing had happened. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She didn't notice the way my hands trembled, didn't see the crack she'd just widened. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom, the curtains drawn, the air thick with the scent of lavender from a candle I'd lit to calm myself. It didn't work. My mind replayed every moment, the way Vanessa had dismissed me, the way Candace's name kept slipping into our conversations, the way Douglas's visits always left me feeling smaller. I thought of the photo on the mantel, of the girl who used to need me. Where had she gone? I stood and walked to the door, my hand hovering over the lock. I'd never locked it before, not in 30 years. This was my home, my safe place, but tonight it felt different. Like the walls themselves were watching me, waiting for me to decide something. I turned the lock, the click loud in the silence. It wasn't just about keeping others out. It was about keeping myself in, holding on to the part of me that was still mine. How do you swallow a wound that keeps bleeding? I stood in the living room, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. My hands were still folded in my lap, but inside, my heart churned like a storm. Vanessa's words from that phone call, "Candace deserves this house more," echoed in my mind, sharp and relentless. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that it was a mistake, but the truth was clawing at me, and I couldn't look away anymore. The days after Vanessa's birthday party blurred into a haze of routine. I cleaned the house, tended the garden, cooked meals for one. But the air felt heavier now, thick with questions I didn't dare ask. The suburban streets outside were quiet, the November chill settling over Northern California like a shroud. The roses in the backyard had begun to wilt, their petals curling inward, and I couldn't help but feel like they were mirroring something in me, something fading, something I was fighting to hold on to. It was a Thursday afternoon when the next blow came. I was in the kitchen chopping onions for a stew, the sharp scent stinging my eyes. The radio played softly. a talk show host droning about holiday plans, but I barely listened. Vanessa had texted earlier saying she'd stop by to talk about something important. My stomach nodded at the words, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she wanted to plan Thanksgiving or catch up. Maybe she'd noticed how quiet I'd been. The front door opened and Vanessa's heels clicked against the hardwood. "Mom!" she called, her voice clipped, businesslike. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped into the living room. She was already seated on the couch, her purse on her lap, her posture stiff. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair pulled back tightly, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. Not the girl who used to sprawl on that same couch, eating popcorn and laughing at old movies. "Hey, honey," I said, forcing a smile. "You want some tea? I was just—" "No, I'm good," she cut in, her eyes flicking to her phone, then back to me. "I don't have a lot of time. I just need to talk to you about the house." My smile faltered. The house again. I sat across from her, the coffee table between us feeling like a chasm. "Okay," I said slowly. "What about it?" Vanessa leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Candace has been helping me with some real estate stuff. You know, figuring out investments, property values. She's really good at this, Mom. Like she helped me put together a whole plan for buying my own place." Her voice was bright, almost rehearsed, but there was an edge to it, something calculated. I nodded, my fingers tightening around the armrest. "That's great, Vanessa. I'm proud of you. But what does this have to do with our house?" She sighed, like I was missing something obvious. "Mom, Candace says this place is a gold mine, but it's just sitting here. You're not doing anything with it. I mean, you're holding on to old memories, but that's not practical. Candace helped me run the numbers, and we could sell it, split the profit, and you could get something smaller. She says it's the smart move." The words hit like a slap, each one deliberate, cutting deeper than the last. I stared at her, my breath shallow. "Vanessa," I said, my voice low, "this isn't just a house. It's our home. I raised you here. I stayed here after the divorce to keep things stable for you." She rolled her eyes, a quick, dismissive flick that made my chest burn. "Yeah, I know, Mom. You've said that a million times. But Candace says holding on to the past doesn't build a future. She's been helping me with my portfolio, my career. She gets how the world works. You just keep things the same." I felt the air shift, the room growing smaller, the walls pressing in. My hands trembled, but I kept them still, hidden in my lap. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to me if we sell? Where do I go?" Vanessa shrugged, like it was a minor detail. "You'd figure it out. Candace says there are tons of nice condos nearby. Smaller places, easier to maintain. You wouldn't have to worry about this big house anymore." Her tone was so casual, so detached, it was like she was reading from a script Candace had written. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Vanessa jumped up, her face brightening. "Oh, that's probably Dad and Candace. I asked them to come by." My stomach dropped. I hadn't invited them. This was my house, and yet here they were, walking into my life unannounced. Douglas strode in first, his cologne sharp and overpowering, followed by Candace, her smile as smooth as ever. She carried a bottle of wine, a gesture that felt more like a prop than a gift. "Evelyn," she said, her voice warm but laced with something I couldn't trust, "this place looks as charming as ever, but gosh, it must be a lot to keep up with." I nodded, my throat tight, and took the wine to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe. The counter was cool under my palms, the chopped onions still scattered where I'd left them. I heard their voices in the living room, Douglas's low chuckle, Candace's lilting tone, Vanessa's eager agreement. They were talking about the house, about market trends and equity. My house, my life. When I returned, Candace was standing by the mantel, her fingers brushing the frame of that old photo of Vanessa and me. "This place has such potential," she said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But it needs a fresh touch, Evelyn. A new energy, don't you think?" I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. A new energy, as if I were the stale, outdated thing that needed replacing. I wanted to snap back, to tell her this was my home, not hers to redesign. But my tongue felt heavy, my voice trapped. I glanced at Vanessa, hoping for a flicker of defense, but she was nodding, her eyes fixed on Candace like she was some kind of oracle. The conversation turned to logistics, taxes, appraisals, timelines. I sat there silent, my hands clenched in my lap, as they discussed my future like I wasn't even in the room. Then Vanessa dropped the final blow. "Mom," she said, her voice firm, "Candace and I were thinking, if we sell, you could sign the house over to me. To keep it in the family. You'd still live here, of course, with me and maybe my kids someday. It's just paperwork." Paperwork. The word echoed, cold and clinical. I stared at her, my daughter, the girl I'd raised, and saw a stranger. Sign over my house? To her? So she could control it. Control me? I felt a wave of nausea, the room tilting slightly. This wasn't just about selling. This was about stripping me of everything. My home, my role, my dignity. I forced a nod, my lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll think about it," I managed, my voice barely audible. Vanessa smiled, satisfied, and stood to leave with Douglas and Candace. As they walked out, Candace's voice drifted back. "You're doing the right thing, Vanessa. It's time for a change." The door closed and the house fell silent again. I sat there, staring at the empty wine bottle on the coffee table, its label mocking me with its elegance. The smell of onions lingered in the air, sharp and bitter. My hands shook as I stood, my reflection catching in the window. I looked older, smaller, like the woman I'd fought so hard not to become. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the house creaking around me, and called my bank. The automated voice on the line was calm, detached, as I checked my accounts, my savings, the mortgage I'd paid off years ago. Everything was still mine, for now. But Vanessa's words, Candace's smile, Douglas's presence, they were circling, closing in. How do you keep breathing when the ground beneath you cracks? I stood in my bedroom, the curtains half drawn, the late November light spilling across the hardwood in thin gray slats. My hands clutched a stack of mail I'd retrieved from the box, the paper crinkling under my fingers. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that hums with dread, like the moment before a storm breaks. Vanessa's words from our last conversation, "Sign the house over to me," had been looping in my mind for days, each repetition sharper, heavier, until they felt like a blade pressed against my chest. The air in Northern California had turned colder, the suburban streets lined with bare trees, their branches clawing at the sky. I'd spent the week since Vanessa's visit moving through the house like a ghost, dusting surfaces that didn't need it, watering plants that were already drowning. The kitchen smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning, its sharp tang clinging to the air. I told myself I was fine, that I could handle this. But every time I passed the mantel where that photo of Vanessa and me sat, I felt a pang, a reminder of the girl who used to need me, and the stranger who now saw me as an obstacle. It was a Tuesday evening when the final straw landed. I was sorting through the mail at the dining table, the wood cool under my elbows, when I noticed an envelope from the county recorder's office. My name was typed neatly on the front, but something about it felt wrong, like a letter meant for someone else. I tore it open, my fingers clumsy, and pulled out a document titled Application for Property Title Transfer. My breath caught. The words swam before my eyes, but one detail stood out. The property address was my house, and the proposed new owners were listed as Vanessa Marie Thompson and Candace Elizabeth Reynolds. I stared at the page, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't a suggestion or a conversation. This was a plan. Vanessa had gone behind my back, submitting paperwork to transfer my home, my life's work, into her name and Candace's. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking, and found a copy of a signature page. There, in black ink, was my name, Evelyn Marie Thompson, scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine. A forgery, a betrayal so brazen it stole the air from my lungs. I sank into a chair, the document crumpling in my grip. The room felt smaller, the walls tilting inward, the faint hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but my mind raced. Vanessa's voice echoed from that phone call weeks ago. Candace deserves this house more. Candace's smile at the birthday party, her hand on the knife as she cut the cake, Douglas's casual dismissal every time he walked through my door. They weren't just pushing me out, they were taking everything, piece by piece, and I'd been too trusting to see it. I stood and paced the living room, the hardwood creaking under my steps. The air smelled of old wood and the faint lavender of a candle I'd forgotten to blow out. I stopped by the window, staring at the backyard where the roses hung limp, their petals scattered across the frost-kissed grass. I thought of the day I'd planted them, Vanessa toddling beside me, her tiny hands clutching a plastic shovel. "Mommy, will they grow big?" she'd asked, her eyes wide with wonder. I'd laughed and promised they would, just like her. Now those roses were dying, and so was the trust I'd poured into her. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me back. It was a text from Vanessa. "Hey Mom, can we talk tomorrow? Candace has some ideas about the house." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Ideas. That word felt like a trap, a sugar-coated lie to cover what they'd already done. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the document again, my eyes scanning every line. There, buried in the fine print, was a note. Transfer initiated to avoid excessive property taxes. A justification, as if they were doing me a favor. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty house. Avoid taxes? They thought I was that naive? I'd paid off this house alone after Douglas left, scraping by on late-night shifts and budget meals. I'd signed every check, replaced every broken pipe, painted every wall. This wasn't just a house, it was mine. Proof of every sacrifice, every tear, every moment I'd chosen to keep going for Vanessa, and now she'd forged my name to steal it. I walked to the kitchen, my movements slow, deliberate. The knife I'd used to chop vegetables that morning still sat on the counter, its blade glinting under the fluorescent light. I didn't touch it, but I stared at it, my reflection distorted in the steel. For a fleeting moment I imagined confronting them, Vanessa, Candace, Douglas, screaming until my voice gave out. But that wasn't me. I wasn't the woman who shouted or broke things. I was the one who stayed calm, who cleaned up the messes, who kept the world turning. And yet, that calm was cracking now, splintering under the weight of their betrayal. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinets, the tile cold through my jeans. My hands trembled as I clutched the document, its edges crumpling further. I thought of calling Vanessa, demanding answers, but what would she say? More excuses? More of Candace's ideas? I thought of Douglas, his smug grin, the way he'd always acted like this house was his to reclaim. And Candace, with her polished words and calculated kindness, orchestrating it all. The betrayal wasn't just the forgery. It was the realization that my daughter, the person I'd loved most, had chosen them over me. She'd stood in my home, eaten my food, smiled at my stories, and all the while she'd been plotting to take it away. The pain was raw, a physical ache in my chest, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I pressed my hands to my face, my fingers damp with tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. I don't know how long I sat there, the house settling around me, its creaks and groans a quiet chorus. The lavender candle flickered on the counter, its flame weak but stubborn. I thought of my mother, Lillian, and the way she'd always carried herself, steady, unyielding, even when the world tried to break her. She'd told me once after my divorce, "Evelyn, you don't need a man to stand tall. You just need to know what's yours." I'd nodded then, but I hadn't truly understood. Now I did. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked to the phone. My fingers dialed Lillian's number before I could second-guess myself. The line rang twice before her voice came through, warm but laced with concern. "Evelyn? It's late. Everything okay?" I opened my mouth, but the words caught, tangled in my throat. How do you tell your mother that your daughter has betrayed you, that your home, your life is slipping through your fingers? I took a breath, the air sharp in my lungs, and said, "Mom, I need you." She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. "I'm here, sweetheart. Tell me what's happened." As I spoke, the words spilling out in a rush, I felt the storm inside me shift, not calming, but focusing. The document lay on the table, its forged signature glaring up at me. Vanessa thought she could take everything. Candace thought she could outsmart me. Douglas thought I'd stay silent, as I always had. They were wrong. Could you ever outrun a betrayal that lives in your bones? I stood at the edge of my backyard, the frost-kissed grass crunching under my boots, staring at the roses I'd planted decades ago. Their thorns glinted in the pale morning light, sharp and unyielding, like the truth I'd finally faced. The forged document, Vanessa's signature, Candace's name, my home stolen, sat heavy in my pocket, a weight I carried everywhere. I'd spent 30 years building this life, and now I was choosing to walk away. Not because I was broken, but because I was ready to fight. The Northern California winter had settled in, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. My house, once a warm haven, felt like a cage now, its walls echoing with Vanessa's cold words and Candace's calculated smiles. I moved through the rooms with purpose, my footsteps deliberate, the creak of the hardwood a reminder of every year I'd poured into this place. The kitchen smelled of coffee I'd brewed but hadn't touched, the mug sitting cold on the counter. I couldn't stay here, not anymore, not after what they'd done. The night I'd called my mother, Lillian, everything had shifted. Her voice, steady and fierce, had cut through my panic like a lighthouse beam. "Evelyn," she'd said, "you're not losing anything. You're taking it back." She didn't just listen. She gave me a plan, a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. I sat at the dining table now, the same table where Vanessa had asked me to sign away my home, and opened the folder Lillian had sent. Inside were documents, bank statements, trust agreements, property records, all in my name, all untouchable. My mother had been preparing for this, long before I'd even seen the cracks. I ran my fingers over the pages, the paper smooth and cool, each line a promise of freedom. Lillian had set up a trust years ago, after her own battles with loss, to ensure I'd never be left with nothing. "I lost everything once," she'd told me, her voice low, her eyes distant. "Your father took it all, our savings, our home. I won't let that happen to you." Those words had stayed with me, a quiet fire kindling in my chest. She'd been my rock, my guardian, and now she was my shield. I spent the next morning in the study, the room dim with drawn curtains, the air thick with the musty scent of old books and ink. I sorted through my own papers, mortgage records, tax filings, the deed to the house, each one a piece of the life I'd built alone after Douglas left. My hands moved methodically, but my mind wandered, replaying memories of Vanessa as a child. Her laughter as we baked cookies, her tiny hand in mine as we walked to the park. Those moments felt like another lifetime, one where I'd believed love was enough to keep us whole. Now I saw the truth. Love hadn't been enough to stop her from forging my name, from choosing Candace over me. I paused, my gaze catching on a photo tucked into a drawer. Vanessa at 5, her pigtails bouncing as she ran through the backyard. I touched the frame, my throat tightening. Had I failed her somehow? Had I been too soft, too trusting? The questions gnawed at me, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't about guilt. This was about survival. By noon, I'd made my decision. I couldn't stay in this house, not while Vanessa and Candace thought they could claim it. I packed a single suitcase, clothes, a few photos, my mother's old locket. Each item chosen with care, a tether to the woman I was reclaiming. The suitcase sat by the front door, its leather worn but sturdy, like me. I called the bank again, my voice steady as I transferred my savings to a new account, one Vanessa couldn't touch. I canceled joint credit cards, updated passwords, locked down every piece of my financial life. Each click felt like a step away from their control, a brick in the wall I was building around myself. I drove to Lillian's house that afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds, the road lined with skeletal trees. Her home was a small bungalow an hour away, its porch sagging but welcoming, the air smelling of her herb garden, rosemary and thyme. She met me at the door, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes sharp despite her 79 years. She didn't hug me, didn't need to. She just nodded, her hand firm on my shoulder, and said, "You're doing the right thing." We sat in her living room, the fireplace crackling, the warmth seeping into my bones. She poured tea, the steam curling upward, and handed me a cup. "You're not running," she said, her voice like iron. "You're regrouping. There's a difference." I nodded, my fingers tracing the rim of the cup, the porcelain smooth under my touch. She told me about the trust again, how she'd set it up after my father's betrayal, how she'd saved every penny to protect me. "It's yours now," she said, "not just the money, the power. Use it." I spent the night in her guest room, the bed creaking under me, the air cool and scented with lavender from a sachet on the nightstand. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as clouds passed over the moon. My mind churned with plans, not just to protect myself, but to fight back. Vanessa thought she could take my home with a forged signature. Candace thought she could charm her way into my life. Douglas thought I'd crumble, as I always had. They didn't know me, not really. They didn't know the woman I was becoming. The next morning, I returned to the house one last time. The air was crisp, the driveway dusted with frost. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing, memorizing every detail, the scuff on the kitchen floor from Vanessa's rollerblades, the crack in the bathroom tile I'd never fixed. I didn't cry, I didn't linger. I locked the door behind me, the click final, and drove away. The rearview mirror showed the house shrinking, its white shutters fading into the distance, but I didn't look back. I checked into a small hotel downtown, its lobby smelling of coffee and polished wood. The clerk's smile polite but distant. My room was simple, the bed firm, the view a sliver of the city skyline. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange calm, like the quiet after a fever breaks. I wasn't running from them. I was stepping out of their trap, moving to a place where I could see clearly, plan carefully. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow harsh in the dim room, and began drafting emails. To my bank, to a lawyer Lillian had recommended, to the county recorder's office. Each word was precise, each sentence a reclaiming of my power. I wasn't just protecting my home. I was preparing to take back everything they thought they could steal. Vanessa's face flashed in my mind, her smile, her cold dismissal, and I felt a pang, but it was fleeting. She'd made her choice. Now I was making mine. As I closed the laptop, the room silent except for the hum of the heater, I thought of Lillian's words. "You're not losing anything, you're taking it back." I stood and walked to the window, the city lights flickering below, a world moving on without me. They'd laughed as I left, Vanessa and Candace, thinking I'd given up. They didn't know that the day I walked out was the day I began to reclaim everything. How do you watch someone's world crumble when you're the one who lit the match? I sat in my hotel room, the city lights pulsing beyond the window, a glass of water untouched on the nightstand. The air was cool, scented with the faint chemical tang of fresh linens, but my mind was sharp, alive with the weight of what I'd set in motion. Vanessa's forged signature, Candace's name on that document. They thought they'd trapped me. But now the trap was springing back, and I was the one pulling the strings. The Northern California winter deepened, the days growing shorter, the sky a heavy gray that mirrored the tension I felt. I'd been at the hotel for a week, my suitcase still half packed, my life condensed into a few essentials. The room was small but functional, its beige walls and generic art a stark contrast to the cluttered warmth of my home. Yet there was a clarity here, a quiet that let me think, plan, breathe. I'd locked down my accounts, secured my assets, and left the house behind, not as a surrender, but as a strategy. Lillian's words echoed in my mind. "You're regrouping," and regroup I did. The first sign of their unraveling came on a Monday morning. I was at a coffee shop near the hotel, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon. My laptop was open, my fingers poised over the keyboard, drafting another email to the county recorder's office about the forged document. My phone buzzed, Vanessa's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering, then let it go to voicemail. The message came through a moment later, her voice tight, almost frantic. "Mom, why is the joint account frozen? I tried to pay a bill and it's locked. Call me back, okay?" I didn't call back. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me, and opened my banking app. The joint account, one I'd kept open for Vanessa's emergencies, was indeed frozen, just as I'd instructed. Every penny I'd earned, every asset in my name, was now untouchable. I'd spent years being the safety net, the one who paid for her car repairs, her phone bills, her whims. No more. Let her feel the weight of her choices. The second blow landed that afternoon. I was back in my hotel room, the curtains drawn, the hum of the heater a soft backdrop. My laptop pinged with an email from Lillian, forwarding a scanned document, a court summons addressed to Douglas. The county had flagged the title transfer application after my complaint, and now they were investigating the forged signature. The summons was formal, its language cold and precise, demanding Douglas's presence to explain potential fraudulent activity. I read it twice, my pulse quickening, a strange mix of satisfaction and dread curling in my chest. He'd always been so careful, so smug. Now he was caught. I imagined him opening that letter, his face paling, his hands tightening around the paper. Douglas, who'd walked into my home like he still owned it, who'd let Candace whisper plans to steal what was mine. I wondered what he was feeling. Anger? Panic? Did he know I was the one who'd reported it? Or did he think it was a clerical error? The thought of his uncertainty, his loss of control, sent a shiver through me. For the first time in years, I held the upper hand. Then came Candace. Late that evening, as I sat on the hotel bed, the city's neon glow seeping through the blinds, my phone chimed with an email. The subject line was simple: "Let's talk." It was from Candace, her tone dripping with the same polished warmth she'd used at Vanessa's birthday party. "Evelyn," she wrote, "I'm so sorry for any misunderstanding about the house. Vanessa and I were only trying to help you avoid tax complications. Let's sit down and sort this out. I'd hate for things to escalate. How about we split the house's value? It's fair, don't you think?" I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Fair? She thought she could bribe me, charm me into giving up what I'd fought for. The email was a performance, contrite, reasonable, but laced with desperation. She knew the summons had gone out. She knew the walls were closing in. I leaned back against the headboard, the pillow firm against my spine, and let out a slow breath. Candace wasn't offering a truce. She was scrambling to save herself. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to Lillian, adding a single line. "She's nervous." My mother's response came within minutes. "Good. Let her squirm." I smiled, a small cold curve of my lips, and closed the laptop. The room was quiet, the air still, but I felt alive, electric. For so long, I'd been the one reacting, absorbing their dismissals, their betrayals. Now they were the ones reacting to me. I stood and walked to the window, the glass cool against my fingertips. The city sprawled below, its lights flickering like a heartbeat. I thought of Vanessa's voicemail, her voice edged with panic. I thought of Douglas, his confidence crumbling under the weight of that summons. I thought of Candace, her carefully crafted facade cracking with every unanswered email. They were unraveling just as I'd planned, but it wasn't enough to watch them falter. I needed to ensure they'd never touch what was mine again. I sat back down, my hands steady now, and opened a new email. This time, it was to the lawyer Lillian had connected me with, a woman named Heather, sharp and relentless, who'd promised to handle the forgery case with precision. I attached Candace's email, along with a note. "This is evidence of their intent. I want to pursue charges for identity fraud." I hit send, the soft click of the keyboard a quiet victory. As the email sent, I leaned back, my eyes drifting to the ceiling. The hotel room felt less like a hiding place now, more like a command center. I wasn't the woman who'd sat in her kitchen, trembling over a forged document. I wasn't the mother who'd nodded silently as her daughter dismissed her. I was someone new, someone they'd underestimated. I thought of Vanessa's face, the way she'd smiled when she suggested signing over the house. Did she know about the summons yet? Was she starting to realize the cost of her betrayal? I pictured her checking her phone, waiting for my reply, her confidence fraying with every unanswered call. And Douglas, did he see me differently now, or was he still blind to the strength I'd hidden for years? The room was dark, the only light coming from the city outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I stood and opened the window, letting the cold air rush in, sharp and bracing. They were afraid now, not just of losing the house, but of me, and that fear was only the beginning. How do you rebuild a life when the pieces are scattered by betrayal? I sat at a small wooden desk in my hotel room, the surface scratched but sturdy, a legal pad open before me. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of industrial cleaner and the coffee I'd brewed in the room's cheap machine. Outside, the Northern California winter pressed against the window, the city lights blurred by a thin layer of fog. My laptop glowed with emails from Heather, my lawyer, each one a step toward reclaiming what was mine. The forged document, Vanessa's betrayal, Candace's desperate email. They were no longer just wounds. They were weapons, and I was learning how to wield them. The days since I'd frozen the accounts and reported the forgery had been a whirlwind of precision. I'd left my home, but not my resolve. The hotel room, with its beige walls and stiff bedding, had become my temporary fortress, a place where I could think clearly, away from the echoes of Vanessa's dismissal and Candace's calculated charm. The outline of my plan was taking shape, each piece falling into place like tiles in a mosaic. Lillian had given me the foundation, her trust, her strength, and now I was building on it, brick by brick. I met Heather on a crisp Tuesday morning at her office, a sleek space downtown that smelled of leather and polished wood. The waiting area was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of a receptionist's keyboard. Heather was exactly as Lillian had described, sharp, no nonsense, with dark hair pulled into a low bun and eyes that seemed to see through you. She shook my hand firmly, her grip a silent promise of competence, and led me to a conference room. The table was glass, cold under my fingers, and the window offered a view of the city, its rooftops dusted with frost. "Evelyn," Heather said, sliding a folder across the table, "you've got a strong case. The forged signature is clear evidence of fraud, and Candace's email is practically an admission of intent. We can push for criminal charges, identity theft, document forgery, and a civil suit to void the transfer application." Her voice was steady, each word measured, but there was a fire in her eyes, a spark of indignation that mirrored my own. I nodded, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of her words settling over me. "What about Vanessa?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "She's my daughter. I don't want to destroy her, but she did this." Heather leaned back, her pen tapping lightly against the folder. "We'll focus on the legal consequences, freezing her access to your assets, removing her from any joint accounts or inheritance claims. She'll face scrutiny for her role in the forgery, but we can calibrate how hard we push. It's your call." Her tone was professional, but there was a warmth there, a hint of understanding. She'd been my friend in college, back when I was still Evelyn the dreamer, not Evelyn the betrayed. She knew what this cost me. I took a breath, the air sharp in my lungs, and thought of Vanessa, her smile at the birthday party, her cold dismissal when she'd suggested signing over the house. I loved her, but love didn't mean letting her walk over me. "Do what's necessary," I said finally. "I want my home back. I want them to know they can't take it." Heather nodded, a small smile curving her lips. "Good, let's get to work." Back at the hotel, I sat with Lillian's documents. The trust she'd set up years ago spread across the desk. The pages were worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but their power was undeniable. She'd transferred full financial authority to me, a quiet act of defiance against the world that had once stripped her bare. I traced her signature, my fingers lingering on the elegant loops of her name. Lillian had been my shadow warrior, preparing for this moment when I hadn't even known I'd need her. Now it was my turn to fight. I spent hours on the phone with Heather, the receiver pressed to my ear, the hotel's thin walls doing little to muffle the city's hum. We reviewed every detail: the forged document, Candace's email, Douglas's role in the scheme. Heather was methodical, her questions sharp, her notes precise. She drafted a counterclaim to the title transfer, citing unlawful transfer, fraud, and falsification of public records. She prepared a separate filing for identity theft, attaching the forged signature as evidence. Each document was a shield, a sword, a reclaiming of my place in the world. Between calls, I paced the room, the carpet muffling my steps. The air smelled of coffee and the faint lavender of a sachet I'd tucked into my suitcase, a reminder of home. I thought of the kitchen I'd left behind, its scuffed floor and chipped mugs. I thought of the roses in the backyard, their thorns sharp enough to draw blood. I'd always been the one to tend them, to prune and water and coax them back to life. Now I was tending to myself, cutting away the parts that no longer served me. I paused by the window, the glass cool against my palm, and looked out at the city. The fog had lifted, revealing the sharp edges of buildings, the steady pulse of traffic. I remembered a moment from years ago when Vanessa was 16, sulking in her room after a fight with Douglas. I'd sat on her bed, stroking her hair, promising her everything would be okay. "You're my world," I'd whispered, and she'd hugged me, her tears soaking my shirt. Where was that girl now? Had she been lost to Candace's influence, or had I been blind to who she was becoming? The thought stung, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about regret. It was about action. I sat back down, my hands steady now, and opened my laptop. Heather had sent a draft of the legal filings, each page a testament to the woman I was becoming. I read through them, my eyes catching on phrases like intentional misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. They were cold, clinical words, but they carried my truth, my fight. I thought of Douglas, his smug grin when he'd walked into my home, his name now tied to a fraud investigation. I thought of Candace, her email a desperate plea to avoid consequences, and Vanessa, my daughter, who'd chosen to betray me. They'd expected me to crumble, to stay silent as I always had. But silence was no longer my language. I was speaking now, through lawyers, through documents, through the power Lillian had given me. As I closed the laptop, the room fell quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the heater. I stood and walked to the mirror, my reflection sharp in the dim light. My face was lined, my eyes tired, but there was a strength there, a resolve I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't just a mother, a housewife, a woman who cooked and cleaned and nodded. I was Evelyn, and I was done being invisible. I thought of the life I'd lived, meals prepared, floors scrubbed, tears swallowed. I'd been the backbone of this family, the one who held it together. Now I was building a new backbone, one forged in law and strategy. They thought I was soft, pliable, a woman who'd bend under pressure. They didn't know I'd been steel all along, waiting for the moment to stand tall. How do you face the people who tried to erase you? I stood in the lobby of Heather's law office, my hands clasped tightly, the marble floor cold beneath my shoes. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, but it did little to ease the storm in my chest. Today was the day I'd confront them. Vanessa, Candace, Douglas, not as the woman they'd dismissed, but as the one they'd underestimated. The forged document, their lies, their betrayal. It had all led to this moment, and I was ready to draw the line. The Northern California winter had grown bitter, the December sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. I'd spent the past week preparing with Heather, her office a war room of legal filings and strategy. The forged title transfer had been voided, the fraud investigation was gaining traction, and Candace's email had been flagged as evidence of intent. My home was still mine, secured by Lillian's trust and Heather's relentless work. But this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about making them see me, truly see me, for the first time. The meeting was set for noon, a mediation session Heather had arranged to resolve disputes before the case escalated to court. I arrived early, my coat damp from the drizzle outside, my breath visible in the chilly air. Heather met me in the lobby, her expression calm but resolute, her dark suit a sharp contrast to the soft beige walls. "You're in control today," she said, her voice low, her hand briefly squeezing my arm. "They're nervous. Use that." I nodded, my throat tight, and followed her to the conference room. The space was stark, its glass table reflecting the gray light from the window, its chairs stiff and unyielding. I sat at one end, my hands folded, the legal pad Heather had given me open to a single page of notes. "Stay calm. State the facts. Demand accountability." The words grounded me, a reminder of the woman I'd become, not the Evelyn who'd cooked and cleaned and stayed silent, but the one who'd locked her accounts, filed charges, and walked away from a trap. They arrived together, a united front that might have intimidated me once. Douglas entered first, his jaw tight, his cologne sharp and intrusive. Candace followed, her blonde hair swept into a flawless updo, her smile strained but still polished. Vanessa came last, her eyes downcast, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. They sat across from me, the table a battlefield, the air thick with unspoken accusations. For a moment, no one spoke, the only sound the soft tick of a clock on the wall. Heather broke the silence, her voice crisp. "We're here to discuss the attempted transfer of Evelyn Thompson's property, which involved a forged signature and unauthorized filings. Evelyn has filed a fraud complaint, and the county is investigating. This is your chance to explain before we proceed to court." Douglas leaned back, his arms crossed, his face a mask of irritation. "This is ridiculous, Evelyn. It was just paperwork, a misunderstanding. You're blowing this out of proportion." I felt a flare of anger, but I kept my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. "A misunderstanding?" I said, my words slow, deliberate. "My signature was forged, Douglas. My home was nearly taken from me. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." Candace's smile faltered, her hands smoothing her skirt, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. "Evelyn, we were trying to help," she said, her tone soft, almost pleading. "The market's hot, and Vanessa mentioned you were struggling to maintain the house. We thought transferring it to her would keep it in the family, save on taxes. I'm sorry if it came across wrong." I turned to her, my gaze unwavering. "You put your name on the transfer, Candace. Not just Vanessa's, yours. Were you planning to move in, or just sell it and split the profit?" My voice was calm, but each word was a blade cutting through her facade. Her eyes widened just for a moment before she looked away, her fingers tightening around her pen. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her face pale, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought it was a good idea. Candace said it would help us all." She glanced at Candace, then back at me, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. But I saw the truth in her hesitation, the way her hands trembled. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, just sorry she'd been caught. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table, the glass cool against my palms. "Vanessa," I said, my voice low but firm. "You forged my name. You stood in my home, ate my food, called me Mom, and then you tried to take everything I've built. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Douglas cleared his throat, his tone patronizing. "Evelyn, let's not make this personal. We can settle this quietly. Split the house's value. Move on. No need for lawyers and drama." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. "Split it? This isn't your house, Douglas. It hasn't been for 15 years. I paid for it, kept it, raised our daughter in it. You don't get to walk in and claim a piece because you feel entitled." I turned to Candace, my voice colder now. "And you don't get to play savior when you're the one who orchestrated this." Heather interjected, her tone professional but edged with authority. "The evidence is clear. A forged signature, an unauthorized transfer, and an email from Candace proposing a split to avoid consequences. We're prepared to pursue criminal charges for identity theft and fraud, as well as a civil suit for damages. If you want to settle, you'll need to offer more than excuses." The room fell silent, the clocks ticking louder now, each second a hammer striking their defenses. Douglas's jaw clenched, his fingers drumming on the table. Candace's smile was gone, her face tight, her eyes darting to Douglas as if seeking rescue. Vanessa stared at her hands, her tears falling silently, staining the table's surface. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor, and looked at each of them in turn. "You thought I'd stay quiet," I said, my voice steady, resonant. "You thought I'd let you take my home, my life, because I've always been the one to bend, but I'm not bending anymore. This is my line, and you've crossed it." I walked out, Heather at my side, the lobby's warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the conference room. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was power, raw and unyielding. I'd faced them, named their lies, and watched their confidence crack. They weren't just fighting me now, they were fighting the truth, and it was heavier than they'd expected. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft thud, I thought of the house, its creaking floors, its rose-filled backyard, its walls that held my life's story. They'd tried to take it, but I was taking it back, not just with lawyers and filings, but with the strength I'd found in myself. Vanessa's tears, Candace's faltering smile, Douglas's anger, they were proof I wasn't invisible anymore. How do you measure the cost of a victory carved from your own heart? I stood in my hotel room, the curtains parted to reveal a city bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the hotel's sterile linens. My hands rested on the windowsill, the wood smooth under my fingers, as I watched the world wake up below. The legal battle was over, the forged document nullified, my home secured, but the weight of what I'd lost lingered, heavy as the fog rolling over the Northern California hills. The weeks following the standoff in Heather's office had been a blur of legal maneuvering, each step a testament to the strength I'd reclaimed. The conference room confrontation had cracked their facade. Vanessa's tears, Candace's faltering smile, Douglas's barely contained anger. But it was only the beginning. Heather had moved swiftly, her filings precise, her arguments airtight. The county's fraud investigation had escalated, and the evidence, my forged signature, Candace's email, the unauthorized transfer, had painted a damning picture. I spent those weeks in a rhythm of purpose, my hotel room a command center of sorts. The desk was cluttered with legal pads, their pages filled with my notes, timelines, questions for Heather, fragments of memories I couldn't shake. The air smelled of coffee, its bitterness a constant companion as I pored over emails and court documents. The city outside was a distant hum, its pulse muted by the thick glass of my window. I'd traded the warmth of my home for this sterile space, but it wasn't exile. It was strategy, a place to stand firm while the world I'd known unraveled. The court hearing came on a cold December morning, the sky a slate of unbroken gray. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blazer and a cream blouse, the colors muted but strong, a reflection of the woman I'd become. The courthouse was imposing, its marble steps slick with rain, its halls echoing with the murmur of voices and the click of heels. I walked beside Heather, her briefcase swinging lightly, her confidence a quiet anchor. My hands were steady, but my heart raced, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. Not just my home, but my identity, my right to exist unapologetically. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, its wooden benches worn, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and wax polish. I sat in the front row, my hands folded, the legal pad in my lap a shield of sorts. Vanessa, Candace, and Douglas sat across the aisle, their faces a study in tension. Vanessa's eyes were red, her hands twisting a tissue, her posture slumped. Candace sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, her usual polish dulled by the weight of scrutiny. Douglas leaned back, his arms crossed, but his jaw was tight, his eyes darting to the judge's bench. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense gaze, called the session to order. Heather presented our case with surgical precision, her voice clear and unwavering. She submitted the forged document, its falsified signature glaring under the courtroom's harsh lights. She read Candace's email aloud, its words, "Let's split the house's value," hanging in the air like a confession. She detailed the financial locks I'd placed, the trust Lillian had secured, the steps I'd taken to protect what was mine. Each point was a brick in the wall I'd built, a rebuttal to their assumption that I'd crumble. Their lawyer, a wiry man with a nervous tic, stumbled through a defense. He argued miscommunication, claimed the transfer was meant to benefit the family, and downplayed the forgery as a clerical error. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge's expression grew sterner with each weak excuse. I watched Vanessa, hoping for a flicker of remorse, a sign she understood the depth of her betrayal, but she wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor, her tissue now a shredded mess in her hands. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my legs steady despite the tremor in my chest. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with expectation. I looked at the judge, then at them, Vanessa, Candace, Douglas, and let my voice fill the space. "This house is more than property," I said, my words slow, deliberate. "It's 30 years of my life, every sacrifice, every late night, every moment I chose to keep going for my daughter. They tried to take it with a lie, a forged signature, a plan they thought I'd never uncover, but I'm here, and I'm not invisible anymore." I sat down, my hands trembling now, but not from fear, from the release of a truth I'd held too long. The judge nodded, her pen scratching notes, and I felt a quiet surge of triumph. Heather squeezed my hand under the table, her touch brief but grounding. The ruling came swiftly. The title transfer was voided, the house reaffirmed as mine, its deed untouchable under Lillian's trust. The fraud charges were upheld, with Candace and Vanessa facing potential fines and community service, though Heather had calibrated the penalties to spare Vanessa a harsher sentence. Douglas was ordered to cover legal fees, his role as an enabler noted in the record. The judge's gavel fell, a sharp crack that echoed in my bones, sealing my victory. I walked out of the courthouse, the rain now a soft drizzle, the air cool against my face. Heather smiled, her eyes bright with pride. "You did it, Evelyn," she said, her voice warm. "You took it back." I nodded, my throat tight, and stepped onto the wet pavement, the city's pulse louder now, vibrant. I'd won, but the victory was bittersweet, tinged with the ache of what I'd lost. My daughter's trust, the illusion of family. That evening I returned to the hotel, the room unchanged but somehow smaller, as if the world outside had grown larger. I sat at the desk, the legal pad open, and wrote a letter I'd never send. "Vanessa," it began, "I fought for the house, but I was fighting for us too. Why couldn't you see that?" I poured out my hurt, my love, my anger, the ink smudging under my fingers. I thought of her in the courtroom, her tears, her silence, and wondered if she'd ever understand what she'd broken. I stood and walked to the window, the city lights shimmering through the rain-streaked glass. The roses in my backyard came to mind, their thorns sharp but their blooms resilient, even in winter. I was like them, I realized, scarred but standing, ready to grow again. The house was mine, my life was mine, and no one could take that away. But as I watched the city breathe, a question lingered, soft but persistent. Could I rebuild without Vanessa, or was there still a piece of her I could save? What does it mean to start over when the past still whispers your name? I stood in the doorway of my home, the familiar creak of the hardwood under my feet a quiet welcome. The air smelled of fresh paint and the faint sweetness of roses drifting through the open window. The northern California sun streamed in, soft and golden, illuminating the walls I'd fought to keep. The legal battle was over, the house was mine, but this wasn't the same life I'd left behind. It was something new, something I was building with my own hands. The weeks after the courthouse victory had been a careful dance of reclaiming and rebuilding. The judge's ruling had secured my home, nullified the forged transfer, and left Vanessa, Candace, and Douglas scrambling in the wreckage of their failed scheme. I'd returned to the house the day after the hearing, my suitcase in hand, the key turning smoothly in the lock. The silence was different now, not heavy with betrayal, but open, waiting for me to fill it. I moved through the room slowly, my fingers trailing over familiar surfaces, the scuffed kitchen counter, the chipped banister, the mantel where Vanessa's graduation photo still sat. The house was unchanged, yet it felt larger, as if it had expanded to hold the woman I'd become. I opened the windows, letting the winter air sweep through, carrying away the staleness of the past. The backyard roses, though wilted, showed signs of life, their buds tightening against the cold, promising blooms in spring. I smiled, my breath visible in the chill, and felt a quiet kinship with them, scarred but enduring. I spent the first days cleaning, not out of obligation but as a ritual of renewal. The kitchen smelled of lemon and sage as I scrubbed the counters, the rhythm of my movements steady, grounding. I rearranged the living room, moving the couch to face the window, letting the light pour in. I hung new curtains, their soft blue fabric a contrast to the heavy drapes I'd once chosen to please Douglas. Each change was small, deliberate, a reclaiming of space that was mine alone. Lillian visited often, her presence a steady anchor. We sat in the kitchen, the table scattered with her herb cuttings, rosemary, thyme, lavender, their scents mingling with the coffee we shared. She didn't ask about Vanessa, didn't push me to grieve or forgive. She just listened, her hands folded, her eyes sharp with the wisdom of her own battles. "You're not starting from nothing," she said one afternoon, her voice low, her fingers brushing a sprig of lavender. "You're starting from everything you've learned." Her words stayed with me as I rebuilt my life. I hired a gardener to tend the roses, a young woman named Maria who hummed as she worked, her hands gentle but sure. I joined a book club at the local library, the smell of old pages and ink a quiet comfort as I sat among strangers who became friends. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned after the divorce, my brushes leaving bold strokes of color on canvas, reds, blues, golds that mirrored the fire I felt inside. The study became my studio, its walls lined with half-finished works, the air thick with the sharp tang of turpentine. I thought of Vanessa often, her absence a bruise that ached when I pressed it. She hadn't called since the hearing, hadn't reached out to explain or apologize. I saw her face in the courtroom, pale, tear-streaked, silent, and wondered if she was ashamed or simply lost. I kept her photo on the mantel, not as a shrine, but as a reminder of the girl she'd been and the woman she might still become. I wrote her letters in my mind, words I'd never send. "I love you, but I can't carry your choices." Sometimes I imagined her reading them, her hands trembling, her heart cracking open. Other times, I pictured her tossing them aside, her loyalty still tied to Candace's hollow promises. Douglas and Candace had faded into the background, their lives no longer my concern. Heather had ensured they faced consequences, fines for Candace, a tarnished record for Douglas, but I didn't dwell on their downfall. Their power over me had been an illusion, one I'd shattered with every legal filing, every step I'd taken to stand tall. I heard through a mutual friend that Candace had lost clients, her real estate reputation stained by whispers of fraud. Douglas, ever the opportunist, was reportedly planning to move, chasing a new venture to escape the scandal. I didn't care. They were ghosts now, irrelevant to the life I was building. I spent evenings in the backyard, a blanket draped over my shoulders, the air cool and scented with earth. The roses were my companions, their thorns a quiet warning to anyone who'd try to take from me again. I sipped tea, its warmth seeping into my hands, and watched the stars emerge, their light steady against the vastness of the sky. I thought of Lillian, her strength woven into every choice I'd made. I thought of the woman I'd been, quiet, accommodating, invisible, and the woman I was now, unapologetic, whole. One night as I sat by the fireplace, its crackle filling the room with warmth, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not a letter to Vanessa, but a story, my story. The words flowed raw and unfiltered, capturing the betrayal, the fight, the victory. I wrote about the house, its creaking floors and rose-filled yard, a character as vital as any person. I wrote about Lillian, her hands stained with soil, her voice a beacon in the dark. I wrote about myself, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd learned to stand when the world tried to push her down. The act of writing was a release, a way to hold the past without letting it hold me. I didn't know if I'd share it, if it would become a book or a blog or simply a file on my computer, But it didn't matter. It was mine, like the house, like the life I was crafting. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and looked around the room. The firelight danced on the walls, the air smelled of wood smoke and lavender, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I stood and walked to the mantel, my fingers brushing the frame of Vanessa's photo. I didn't move it, didn't turn it away. It was part of this house, part of me, even if she wasn't here. I thought of the future, not just mine but hers. Would she find her way back, or would she carry her choices like a shadow? I couldn't answer that, not yet. But I could live fully and fiercely in the life I'd reclaimed. As I turned off the lights, the house settling into its familiar creaks, I felt the weight of my victory. Not just the legal win, but the deeper one, the one that lived in my bones. I was home, not just in this house, but in myself, and no one could take that away. What do you say when the story ends, but the heart keeps speaking? I sat in my living room, the morning light filtering through the new blue curtains, casting a soft glow across the hardwood. The air was warm, scented with the faint sweetness of roses from the backyard and the coffee brewing in the kitchen. My hands rested on a notebook, its pages filled with the story I'd written, my story, raw and unfiltered, a testament to the woman I'd become. The house was mine, my life was mine, but as I looked at the photo of Vanessa on the mantel, I knew some chapters would never fully close. The Northern California spring was stirring, the chill of winter giving way to a tentative warmth. The roses in the backyard were blooming again, their petals vibrant against the green, their thorns as sharp as ever. I'd spent the months since the legal victory settling into my new life, each day a step toward something stronger, something wholly my own. The house, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary, its creaks and groans a familiar song. I'd painted the kitchen a soft yellow, hung new artwork in the hall, planted lavender along the walkway. Each change was a brushstroke, a way of claiming this space as mine, not just in title, but in spirit. I moved through my days with purpose, my routines no longer a shield but a celebration. Mornings were for painting, the study filled with the sharp tang of turpentine and the hum of my own thoughts. Afternoons were for the book club, where I laughed over novels and sipped tea with women who saw me, truly saw me. Evenings were for the backyard, where I sat with a blanket and a book, the stars above a quiet reminder of the world's vastness. Lillian was a constant presence, her visits a blend of herb-scented wisdom and fierce love. "You're not just surviving," she told me one day, her hands stained with soil from her garden. "You're thriving." But Vanessa's absence was a shadow, soft but persistent. She hadn't reached out since the courthouse, her silence a wound I couldn't ignore. I'd heard through a friend that she'd moved to a small apartment, her real estate job on shaky ground after the fraud scandal. Candace's reputation had crumbled, her client list dwindling, and Douglas had left town chasing some new scheme. They were footnotes now, their influence over my life erased. But Vanessa, she was still my daughter, even if she'd chosen to walk away. I thought of her often, her face flickering in my mind like a half-remembered dream. I saw her at 5, giggling as we baked cookies, flour dusting her cheeks. I saw her at 16, crying in my arms after a fight with Douglas. I saw her in the courtroom, her eyes red, her hands clutching a shredded tissue. I wondered what she was feeling now, regret, anger, or simply indifference. I wondered if she'd ever understand why I'd fought, not just for the house, but for myself, for the truth she'd tried to bury. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, its warmth wrapping around me like a shawl, I opened my notebook and read the final pages of my story. The words were raw, unpolished, but they were mine. Every betrayal, every victory, every moment I'd chosen to stand tall. I'd written about the house, its walls holding 30 years of laughter and tears. I'd written about Lillian, her strength a beacon that had guided me through the dark. I'd written about Vanessa not as a villain, but as a girl who'd lost her way, caught in the orbit of people who'd promised her the world and delivered only lies. I closed the notebook, my fingers tracing its worn cover, and stood to make tea. The kitchen was quiet. The only sound, the soft hiss of the kettle and the distant chirp of crickets outside. I poured chamomile into a mug, its steam curling upward, and carried it to the living room. The photo of Vanessa caught my eye, her smile frozen at 18, her arm around my shoulders. I didn't touch it, didn't turn it away. It was part of this house, part of me, even if she wasn't here. I sat on the couch, the mug warm in my hands, and let my thoughts drift. I'd won the house, the legal battle, the right to exist unapologetically. But the victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the life I'd built, the woman I'd become. I was no longer the Evelyn who'd nodded and smiled, who'd swallowed her pain to keep the peace. I was someone new, someone who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger, not because I'd avoided the hurt, but because I'd walked through it. I thought of the future, its edges soft and undefined. I'd keep painting, keep writing, keep tending the roses. I'd welcome Lillian's visits, laugh with my book club, maybe even travel, somewhere warm, where the air smelled of salt and freedom. And Vanessa? I didn't know if she'd come back, if she'd ever knock on my door with an apology or a plea, but I knew I'd leave the door unlocked, not out of weakness but out of hope, not for the girl she'd been, but for the woman she could be. I stood and walked to the window, the glass cool against my palm, the backyard bathed in moonlight. The roses swayed gently, their blooms a quiet promise of renewal. I thought of Lillian's words spoken years ago after my divorce. You don't need anyone to stand tall, Evelyn. You just need to know what's yours. I knew now, not just the house, but my strength, my voice, my worth. I turned off the lights, the house settling into its familiar rhythm, and climbed the stairs to bed. The hallway was dark, the air scented with lavender from a sachet on the table. I paused at the top, my hand on the banister, and felt a quiet certainty settle over me. This was my home, my life, my story. I'd fought for it, bled for it, and now I was living it, fully and fiercely. As I slipped under the covers, the sheets cool against my skin, I thought of Vanessa one last time, not with anger, but with a kind of peace. I'd done what I had to do, for her, for me, for the truth, and whatever came next, I was ready.